I think we're live. We are indeed. Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Perspectives. Indeed, we are live for the second day running. So bear with me as we get the right buttons in place and we get everything streaming correctly. So fingers crossed it all works this time. So anyway, yes, today, welcome to today's Perspectives show. And on today's show, over the weekend, that highly anticipated film Satluj, that uncensored biopic of human rights icon by Jaswant Singh Kalra, of course starring Diljit Dosanjh, it was quietly released online, only then to be abruptly yanked down within 48 hours under direct state pressure. Gosh, so anyway, we'll look past the headlines to examine just what actually happened over the last few days. And more importantly, analyse the family's own official endorsement of the film and discuss just who this narrative in that film truly belongs to. A lot of discussion to be had there. Also in today's show, we'll untangle the dangerous wave of suspicious unrest reported by the Godi media in J&K. We expose a sophisticated cross-border disinformation campaign, this time not from India, from Pakistan. And in closing, we'll recognise the efforts to recover the names of nearly 10,000 lost Punjabi soldiers from the First World War. And if that isn't enough, we'll also celebrate an inspiring Sikh history-making summiting of Mount Everest. Indeed, let's hope we've got time to cover that as well at the end of today's show. Indeed, all this and loads more on today's show. And of course, at the end of the show, assuming we have time, we will zip through loads of your comments, which of course have been filling up beneath the video. So thank you as always to you guys for those. Right, as I say, a lot to get through today. And let's start with this film. Yes, of course, it is this film, Satluj, where we talk about the desperate lengths to which the Indian state will go to control the state narrative, to control the Indian narrative. Well, we've also spoken on this programme extensively over the last few years about this film that was originally entitled Galugara, and then it was renamed Punjab 95. Well, it is, of course, the highly anticipated biopic of that revered human rights activist by Jaswant Singh Kalra. And this film stars Diljit Dosanjh, as we all know. It was directed by a guy called Honey Trehan, or a person called Honey Trehan. Well, 4 years it's taken. And over 4 years, this project has been locked in just a painful, agonising stalemate with the Central Board of Film Certification, the CBFC of India. That's the censoring board of India. And the board didn't just ask for minor edits, as it normally does with any sort of normal film that gets submitted to them for classification and censorship. No, they demanded an unprecedented 127 cuts. And if that wasn't enough, they demanded the removal of references to Punjab. They demanded the removal of certain specific names, even Jaswant Singh Kalra's name itself. And of course, a complete distortion of historic realities under the argument that the film would incite radicalism or endanger national security. Good heavens, and I wonder why. Anyway, so on Friday last week, a few days ago, a sudden crack appeared in this wall of silence. The film was then quietly released directly to the streaming platform Z5 under a new title, Satluj. Crucially, it was released in its complete uncut form. This was the original film. Brilliant. The creative vision exactly as the filmmakers intended. I mean, fantastic. And to celebrate that wonderful release, I'm even going to treat you to the trailer. Here we go.
अमृतसर जिले के सिर्फ 3 शमशान, पट्टी, दुर्गाना और तरनतार। इनमें हमें 2000 से भी ज्यादा नाम ऐसे मिले हैं जिनके सामने लावारिस लिखा है। सारे शमशानों को मिलाके ये आंकड़ा कम से कम 25,000 लाशों का है।
यहाँ पे डेमोक्रेसी है तो सिर्फ हमारी वजह से। अगर पुलिस अपना काम कर रही होती तो हमें तो दिल्ली से आना ही नहीं पड़ता।
अगर मुझे 25,000 लाशों का हिसाब सरकार को देना पड़ा ना, तो मैं 25,001 का दूंगा।
So, that was the film. But of course, the celebration of its release was surprisingly short-lived. I say surprisingly, of course, anybody who knows how India operates wouldn't be the least bit surprised that within 48 hours, Sunday evening, the film was abruptly yanked down from Z5's Indian catalogue, leaving an official notice citing current developments and due process. There you go, if you want to read it yourself. And reports then quickly emerged indicating that the central government had directly intervened, invoking, here we go again, lawfare again, here we go. It was the heavy-handed information technology rules of 2021 to force the streamer to take the film down. We often talk about weaponising the law. Well, here we go again. God forbid a film is released that actually tells the truth. Because when it does, they invoke their lawfare and they bring it down. They force it down through their draconian technology rules, which are used and abused on a regular basis to restrict freedom of speech, to prevent the truth coming out to ordinary Indians and actually finding out the truth of what actually happened during those awful years of the 1980s and 1990s. Now, Satluj, the film itself, does actually remain accessible to the world, to the global audiences outside India through Z5 Global. But of course, if you're living in India, you've been plunged into darkness, sadly. What a surprise. There's only one narrative you're allowed to see and hear in India, and unfortunately, it's not the narrative that reflects the truth. It is the Godi media narrative. So, a story like this usually triggers massive waves of conversations across the diaspora and, of course, within Punjab itself. But to understand what's actually going on here, you've got to look past all the superficial headlines, the angry headlines, and we've got to look at the deeper systemic forces that are going on here. So, why was the film itself pulled? It doesn't take a genius to work it out. The official explanation hides, of course, behind these bureaucratic phrases like security concerns, intermediary guidelines. What does that mean? The reality, of course, is just pure political panic. The Indian establishment is fundamentally, basically terrified of that mirror that Bhai Jaswant Singh Kalra's legacy is holding up to the Indian state. When the film dropped, when it was released on Friday night, it unsurprisingly caused an immediate earthquake, metaphorically speaking. For those brief hours that it was available, tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands, if not potentially even millions, of Indians watched that film. And high-profile lawyers, Sikhs, mainstream non-Sikh commentators began posting on social media, deeply moved by the narrative. This guy, a renowned human rights lawyer, H.S. Fulka, if I pronounce his name correctly, my apologies if I haven't, he stated that the film presents an entirely accurate, devastatingly precise picture of how the Indian judiciary and state systems operated during those terrible times of extrajudicial murders. And of course, the moment the truth was out there and it started resonating with the mainstream audience, the state panicked. We can't have ordinary Indians being told the truth, God forbid. They realised that they were losing control of the narrative, that the CBFC, the Film Censorship Board, had tried to control. Because OTT, it's called over-the-top streaming platforms like Z5, they don't technically fall under traditional certification laws that the CBFC actually have jurisdiction over. So what did the state do? Well, as I said, they weaponised the IT rules of 2021, arm twisting a massive corporate entity like Z5 into compliance. Basically said, comply or else. Using this spurious piece of legislation that essentially gives the Indian state carte blanche to shut anything down it doesn't like. It doesn't even need to really justify it. The levels, the thresholds of justifiability are so low, essentially the Indian state can close down anything it thinks it doesn't like. And of course, the hypocrisy is glaring. It's been called out across social media. For example, these two films, Kashmir Files, the Kerala story. Arguably, similar stories. They told historic truths. They were promoted on, learn the truth, this shocking truth. So they were allowed, they were heavily promoted, but they were insulated from state interference. Didn't matter how divisive they were, but along comes Punjab 95, Galagara or Satluj, whatever you want to call it, a straightforward biographical film about an incredible man who fought for something as basic as human dignity and, of course, highlighted the truth of what happened in the genocides of 1980s and 1990s. It's deemed a threat to national security. And the film's writer, a guy called Varun Bhatt, pointed out, rightly so, it's a human rights story about a common bank employee who showed a huge amount of courage. That's really the story that this film is portraying. And he argued there's nothing inherently political about demanding accountability for the disappeared, those who were extrajudicially murdered by the Indian state and then were anonymously cremated, which is what Bhai Jaswant Singh Kalra discovered. And essentially, the writer says that this is a human right to portray a biopic like this. So, interestingly, among all the political statements and corporate notices that are sort of spinning around, both social media and mainstream media, the most vital perspective, arguably, really belongs to the Kalra family itself. And Bibi Paramjit Kaur Kalra, the wife of Bhai Jaswant Singh Kalra, she's obviously carried the torch of her late husband's mission for the last 30-odd years. She released a very important public statement following the film's release and, of course, then its subsequent ban. And when you read her words and look closely as she endorses the film, the message that she sends is very clear. She acknowledges the immense systemic pressure that's been exerted to dilute, to sanitize, to alter, change the narrative of her husband's life. And she knows better than anyone the roadblocks that have been deliberately put in front of this production to prevent it ever being released in its original form. But her endorsement is totally firm, it's clear. And despite every single attempt by the state to suppress this work, the core truth of Bhai Kalra's sacrifice is out there. The box has been opened. The lid has come off the box. It's out there. Once it's out there, you can't put it back in the box, fortunately. But her statement highlights that the ultimate victory of this film is that it exists in the first place. The fact that a global audience now has witnessed the mechanisms of extrajudicial abductions and murders, illegal cremations, and of course the sheer bravery of Bhai Jaswant Singh Kalra himself standing against this system, this compromised system. That's the story that must never ever be forgotten and never ever be suppressed. So for the family, the film is a hugely important tool for spreading the message, for global awareness, just like Bhai Jaswant Singh Kalra himself did when he stood up in front of the Canadian Parliament, I think it was 1985, to inform the world of what was happening in Punjab at that time. That is courage. So this film serves as that tool, proving that a government can remove a file from an Indian server. It can close the film down domestically. But you cannot, doesn't matter what you do, you cannot erase the historical memory from the global consciousness. People now know the truth of what happened. So Diljit Dosanjh himself, we talked quite a bit about him in recent times. And we've had a bit of a critical view of Diljit in recent weeks after his tour and the Khalistan campaigning that I was going to say dogged his tour, that's the wrong word, that's actually, I would say, celebrated his tour with the wonderful Khalistan flags. What is the role of Diljit in all this himself? I mean, over the last couple of years, his stardom, his star has been rising. He's become a global superstar. He's walked, during this process, a very tight, complex tightrope. And we've seen certain diaspora groups and activists, of course, protesting his tours. We've seen the wonderful Khalistan flags being waved. That guy who actually charged onto the stage, well done to him, bearing the Khalistan flag. But they've accused him of being too mainstream, too commercial, but not vocal enough on what really matters, the political issues. In other words, he's chasing his career, profits, whatever, at the same time ignoring his roots, his heritage, from the platform upon which he could very easily educate the world, and of course domestic Indians. But the reality of what's happened over this weekend, Diljit Dosanjh himself, he chose actually to put his immense commercial career, his Bollywood standing, and of course his corporate sponsorships and what have you, on the line to portray Jaswant Singh Kalra. You know, he didn't have to do this. He could have picked a much easier topic to be the star of. And apparently during an Instagram live session, it was actually broadcast from the US, just after the film was pulled down, he revealed that he did expect this to happen. He said, and actually what he said was he constantly asked his team, will this film ever come out? And can we not even tell our own story? They suppressed his voice by Jaswant Singh Kalra's voice in 1995, and they're still trying to suppress it today. So the question really is, how does Diljit Dosanjh really sit in amongst all this? All the criticisms, and yet he has appeared in this film and he's talked about it, he's promoted it, not just for his own career, but for the message that it sends. Really, he does not, it's obviously more complex. It is not a simplistic situation. He doesn't represent a simplistic political faction. He actually represents, in many ways, the deep, painful tensions of being a Punjabi artist, attempting to preserve, communicate Punjab's darkest truths from its past within a heavily policed, heavily controlled corporate media ecosystem. So he has actually used his platform, his really powerful platform, to actually at least make sure this story was produced, it was funded, and it was eventually distributed. So despite all the criticisms that even I'm guilty of, he actually has got to take some credit for at least being a motivating factor to get this film released and out there. And many analysts actually believe that the sudden unannounced weekend release of the film on Z5 was a deliberate, calculated strategy by the filmmakers and the platform itself. They knew that the film was going to get banned. They knew it was inevitable that it would get pulled as soon as government offices opened on Monday morning. So it's no surprise that it was streamed from Friday night. Because, of course, everybody's gone home for the weekend, haven't they? And knowing on Friday night, you've got a whole weekend to make sure it's widely watched, it's downloaded, it's streamed right across India and the world, and therefore permanently archived through all the digital networks outside in the world that the Indian state has no control over. In other words, they've lifted the lid off the box, the film has escaped into the world, and once it's out there, you can never ever remove it. Once it's on the internet, as we all know, it can never ever be retrieved. So Diljit actually said, he said to his fans on Saturday over the weekend, quite subtly, I feel it could be taken down by Monday. No worries, you download it. So even he, over the weekend, I think he was in on the strategy, knowing that it was deliberately released on the Friday night, knowing it would probably be taken down the moment the workers got into work on Monday morning. But he said over the weekend, quick everybody, download it because it's probably going to disappear soon. And lo and behold, he was actually right. So there is a big discussion here. And Surinder on our Punjabi speaking channel, I believe, and obviously I don't speak Punjabi, so I've had to use a bit of technology to try and get the message that he was getting across in his channel, because I know he did talk a lot about this film in yesterday's, I think it was yesterday's show. So I'm going to sort of align with a lot of what Surinder said in his show. And ultimately, the film is not Diljit Dosanjh's film. He is a highly talented actor. He executed a very professional role with dignity. He did a very good job. But ultimately, the story is not his. It does not belong to him. It also doesn't belong to any corporate production house. This story belongs to the Sikh people. It is, of course, what is portrayed in this film is one single chapter in a huge, painful chronicle of systemic state violence that's been inflicted upon the Sikh community. Not just in the 1980s and 90s, but of course since the 1947. I even talked about the Suba movement yesterday in yesterday's show. But also you've got to recognise there are limitations of mainstream media. A 2.5-hour film like this, in 2.5 hours, you can't portray or even fully begin to tell the monumental scale of those atrocities that happened. The tens of thousands and arguably hundreds of thousands of enforced disappearances. Or, of course, just the depth of trauma that the people in Punjab suffered in those 2 decades. So critics who complain that certain political elements or military operations, whatever, were omitted, yeah, but don't misunderstand this film. The film is basically, as it's never been advertised as anything else. It is a biography of one single man, by Jaswant Singh Kalra's human rights investigation. That's the story that's been told. Great. But don't expect a film of only a couple of hours. You cannot ask it to become an encyclopedia of decades of trauma. So, in other words, treat the film as it is. But it's important that the film is ultimately, it is the first stepping stone for many people outside in the world to understand, to take that first step onto that first stepping stone on a journey of education, of awareness, of understanding what happened to the Sikh people since 1947. So the real question that comes out of this whole saga, and Surinder, I think, brought this out a lot in his discussion, is the role of our own institutions, the Sikh institutions, specifically the SGPC. And of course, you've got people like the Badal family, Sukhbir Singh Badal, Harsimrat Kaur Badal. They themselves have actually, to their credit, have condemned the ban as an assault on truth and collective memory. But of course, we're always a little bit circumspect about anything that comes from the Badal family. We know whose masters they serve. But ultimately, really, there is a bigger question, a harder question to ask the SGPC. Why is the SGPC not using itself more modern, independent digital media platforms to tell the story, the bigger story of the trauma of the Sikh people? Why actually are we having to rely on networks like Z5 or Bollywood, God forbid, to tell the stories of the Sikh martyrs, the shaheeds, the heroic people? Look here, my shoulder, for an example. Why are we having to rely on Indian platforms to tell these stories? Ultimately, if we rely on Indian platforms, essentially the history of the Sikh people is being sold to other people who don't share that heritage and obviously have their own agenda, their own interest to serve. So really the question out there is, it is really high time that the Sikh institutions, whether it's the Akal Takht, the SGPC or whatever, there must be a call for an independent, sovereign Sikh censor board or platforms that can invest in independent global digital distribution of media, films, television programs, whatever it is. The Sikh people have the resources. There is the intellectual capacity. And of course, there's the massive global diaspora out there who are hungry for stuff like this. So really, people like Bhai Jaswant Singh Kalra's story shouldn't have to rely on these sorts of platforms that are vulnerable to state interference, to Indian interference. As soon as they don't like it, they pull the plug. Why are we having to rely on those sorts of platforms? Ultimately, though, the state, as I said, they can pull the plug in India. But fortunately, the film is out there, the story is out there, the message is out there. And it is outside of India's control now, which is great news. So well done to everybody involved in that. We'll keep an eye on and see what happens in the fallout of all this. Right, let's move on. Pakistan, Kashmir. Oh, there's been a lot of stories, a lot of news coming out of J&K and Pakistan-administered Kashmir. It's quite a volatile situation at the moment. Particularly if you read the Godi media, and I want to sort of analyse a little bit of contradictory information that's coming out of both Pakistan and, of course, from India about what actually is going on. Let's start in Kashmir anyway. There is this volatile and heavily controlled information war that's coming out of Kashmir. The NIA in India, that's the National Investigation Agency, has apparently, it is reported that they've officially filed charges against Lashkar-e-Taiba founder, a guy called Hafiz Saeed, and a lot of his compatriots in connection with those Pahalgam attacks that happened, I think it was last April last year, that then kicked off the escalating tensions between India and Pakistan. and which then led to Operation Sindoor. Now, simultaneously, interestingly, I've noticed this. A lot of mainstream Indian news channels are flashing all sorts of these sensational headlines about sudden, widespread militant unrest going on, ambushes, escalating security operations that are apparently tearing through J&K. So, and if you turn to any of these media outlets that on the Godi media, the narrative, as always, it's exactly the same. It is completely uniform and it is united in its absolute uniform aggression. The language it uses, it's almost identical and it's highly aggressive, as it always tends to be when it comes to Pakistan. It's framed entirely, all these stories, or this story that's being reported by the Godi media, it's framed as a textbook case of an imminent, coordinated cross-border campaign orchestrated, of course, by Islamabad, the perennial enemy. And it's used, as always, to justify the immediate deployment of more troops, more militarisation, suspension of basic civil liberties, shut down the internet. It's all happening. It's all the usual same old tactics. In other words, India always will take any opportunity to exert its authoritarian control. And if the opportunity isn't there, it creates it. So, regional tensions in this area, and of course the presence of this armed militancy, they are real. We know this. We acknowledge that there is Islamic extremists who are coming across the border into J&K, particularly in that whole sort of volatile area, and causing mischief, to put it mildly. But it's the timing. As always, when you look at these things, the timing always just happens to be a little bit convenient, doesn't it? It's highly suspect. It's a sudden, hyper-sensationalised set of stories of unrest. And whenever the ruling establishment in India faces challenges, when they want to suddenly cement some sort of new aggressive security policy, then, lo and behold, like good, convenient, compliant dogs, the Godi media conveniently manufactures some sort of fever pitch sequence of stories of external threats. It's all very convenient, isn't it? And highly publicised incidents of unrest, sudden escalations, they've always come. There is a precedent here. It's happened over and over again. It always happens at incredibly convenient political moments. And for years, local populations and of course independent human rights monitors, they've always asked the same questions about the potential for false flag operations. And we know they happen because ultimately the conclusion of any incident, false flag or otherwise, it's always a brutal, immediate clampdown on the local population. Authoritarian control, once again. So when the state, unfortunately, controls every single piece of information coming out of these valleys, it cuts off the internet, it silences local journalists, it imprisons them, threatens them, harasses them if they dare raise any questions, and discovering the truth becomes impossible. And I will never find the truth unless I physically get out there and look at it, because they completely restrict any information coming out. But what we do know, ultimately, whatever the truth is that whenever this suspect, hyper-dramatic sequence of stories is broadcast by the Godi media, it's instantly weaponised to then escalate hostility between India and Pakistan. Meaning any peaceful resolution for Kashmir, it's just never going to happen. So again, we've got to keep calling it every time there is this coordinated campaign of, security operations. We've got to keep calling it out and saying, really? Is this the truth? And talking about Pakistan, I'm just going to sort of segue, follow on to sort of a slightly related story. And it relates to this quite confusing situation in Pakistan. I've reported quite a lot about this over the last couple of weeks. It is quite a contradictory landscape going on in Pakistan when it comes to the Sikh community. And last week, I even talked about this horrible story of a historical Gurdwara that was destroyed. I also pointed out the continuing negligence that quite often plagues non-Muslim heritage sites. And that is despite Pakistan's quite public overtures towards regional cooperation, supporting the Sikh community. They've had all sorts of initiatives that they've publicly proposed to try and promote the Sikh community and actually persuade the Sikh community we are on your side. So again, you get lots of contradictory signals. Anyway, but following the outcry of that story of that Gurdwara being destroyed, the state actually then suddenly moved into damage limitation mode. And the Paigam-e-Aman, apologies for the pronunciation, that's the Message of Peace Committee, working alongside all sorts of local groups and authorities, formally announced a day or two ago the reconstruction of the Sikh Dharamsala in Sheikhupura, that Gurdwara that was demolished. So well done to them. And at the same time, they're renewing vocal demands from within the community, calling for a qualified Sikh leader to then head what's called the Evacuee Trust Property Board, the ETPB. That is the body responsible for managing these historical sites. In the past, it's been historically run by Muslim bureaucratic officials. So it's Muslims, essentially, who've been overseeing these sorts of things. So there are now cries saying, look, you've got to appoint a Sikh to this board for obvious reasons. So these announcements are very welcome, obviously. There is a commitment, clearly, to rebuild and acknowledge the community grievances that have been highlighted. I've talked about them myself. So it does prove that international pressure, diaspora pressure through social media, whatever, it does work. It does have an impact. But, of course, Pakistan itself is operating on I suppose, a bit of a dual-track policy that really, I've got to call out to some degree. Because on the one hand, you've got this high-profile, PR-friendly initiatives, all these sort of good things that they've been doing. I talk about the Kartarpur corridor, the millions that they spent, they invested in the Gurdwara to make sure it is, looking at its best. And these sorts of projects are designed for maximum international visibility. It projects to the world an image of a progressive, tolerant Pakistan state, which is great, because they're seen to welcome global Sikh tourism. So it's a very positive message. But, on the other hand, you've got realities on the ground. We've got essentially a small, highly vulnerable Sikh minority, whether they're in Peshawar, Lahore, wherever, whose lives are just dogged by persistent insecurity and fear. And the state will happily announce all sorts of reconstructions of, Gurdwaras like this after there's been, a public relations disaster. But ultimately, it is struggling to prevent, for example, the targeted killings of those two elderly Sikhs, or an elderly Sikh businessman recently, or, for example, the creeping commercial encroachment on historic Panthic land. Again, reported on that recently. So, you can rebuild a wall, you can rebuild a Gurdwara, you can rename street signs in Lahore, as they've been doing. But ultimately, great, but there's a big but there. If you cannot guarantee the basic rights to life and security of your Sikh citizenship, then it just doesn't work. And it does expose, really, an institutional weakness that Pakistan has. And solidarity, if you want to portray solidarity with the Sikh community, you can't just use it as some sort of PR tool. It's got to be backed up by genuine structural equality. You've got to look after your Sikh community properly, not just through PR campaigns or whatever, or just token initiatives. So, but anyway, as I say, it's there are two hands to this: the positive stories and the negative stories. And Pakistan, it needs to balance it more to the positive. Now, talking about Pakistan, this is an interesting one. I was sent on social media a fascinating video, and I'll show it to you in a moment. I'm going to talk about the digital battleground. And the digital battleground that exists, it is a battleground of misinformation, disinformation, fake news, you name it. But it works with algorithms, deep fakes, engineered psychological films, you name it. It's all out there. But, of course, whenever I come across it, I do like to call it out, just to at least educate you guys to what to look out for. And ultimately, the message is never ever believe anything you see, hear or read, because it quite possibly could be fake. I was sent this video. It is a highly professional, very well produced video that's been circulating around social media and around the diaspora. And the video claims to break a massive, earth-shattering exclusive. The person who sent it to me was understandably quite excited. I saw this and I was excited about it, thinking this is fantastic. This is just what the sort of news we've been waiting for. The Indian Army chief abruptly resigned in disgrace, scapegoated, as he claimed, after the catastrophic failure of a highly classified covert cross-border mission, ultimately referring to Operation Sindoor. Basically, the narrative, and I'll play it to you, it essentially says, in Operation Sindoor, the government has lied to you, has wholeheartedly lied to you. There were indeed many losses on the Indian side, despite the government saying that is not the case. In other words, I am resigning in protest because the government is lying to you. And here is the video itself. Let me just call it up. You have to apologise because we are live. I've got about 1,500 windows open. I actually can't find the actual window. I need to show this video for you. Here we go.
What happened in Parliament was unfathomable. We are being made scapegoat for something that we never participated in. It was Centre's decision to hide the casualties in Operation Sindoor. Minister Rajnath Singh clearly said in Parliament on oath that Indian Army suffered no losses, and now people like Vikram Misri are being used to set blame on military leadership, exonerating the political decision making which we followed. For this, I am resigning in protest and handing over the command to General Dheeraj Seth. He is a seasoned soldier and a capable leader. I wish him all the best, but we can't continue like this.
That video is extraordinary. I've just removed my face so you can see that. That was broadcast allegedly by ANI, one of the mainstream Godi media outlets. So I saw this video. And it's true, isn't it? I mean, that cannot be fake, because there he is with a very clear, articulate speech. It just looks utterly real, but it's not. This is why you've got to be so careful. This is a fake video. It's completely manufactured piece of disinformation. This guy is a real person, and he has actually left the Indian Army, but the whole story is fake. There you go. This is a fact checker who actually themselves just did some digging themselves. They did a forensic analysis. And basically they looked at this and they said, no, this is not true. The speech that this guy gave, it was a resignation speech. It was a retirement speech, actually. And you can read at your leisure what he actually said. But essentially, it was a very typical, very respectful, normal retirement speech. Thanks very much. I've had a wonderful career. Yeah, God bless India. God bless the Indian Army. Send all my best wishes to my successor. Thanks very much. Yeah, that was the reality of his speech. And you've just seen the doctored version. But his mouth is absolutely perfectly forming the words, those fake words. In other words, this is a deep fake. It's terrifying. And again, this is why, even when you see any news items that come from at least some sort of unverified source, question it. And even some verified sources sometimes get it wrong. Even they are hoaxed in the past. I mean, what immediately comes to mind from 30, 40 years ago, the Hitler diaries, which were fake. Some of you older people might remember that. There was allegedly a series of diaries that Adolf Hitler wrote. And the person who faked them, this is even before the internet, managed to hoax all the mainstream news outlets here in Europe. But it was a fake. That was even before the internet. So you can see how sophisticated now these hoaxes, these deep fakes are. This is why you've got to be so damn careful. So apparently this sourced out of Pakistan. It is believed. I mean, it would serve Pakistan's interests. So it's not surprising if indeed it has come from Pakistan. But it does ultimately highlight this fact that both states, India and Pakistan, are just trapped in this toxic loop of manufactured crises, fake information, just to try and justify and validate their own agendas, their own militaristic agendas, and at the same time try and distract you, the people, from what's actually going on in reality. So this whole sort of story about this is just to remind you guys, please. And as I say, I was fooled by this. I just, as just through my normal due diligence, I just dug and dug and dug and dug until I could find something that actually questioned it and then, well, called it out. So, let that be a lesson to all of us. I'll say it's one of the best ones I've seen. It's incredible. Anyway, let's quickly move on. And, oh gosh, clock's counting down. So I'm going to quickly just talk about a very important story. This is the story of 9,909 British Indian Army servicemen who were completely omitted from official records from the First World War. And it's come from the Commonwealth War Graves Commission. And they've just announced this, that they have found these almost 10,000 names of army servicemen from the subcontinent, many of them Punjabis. And it happened during World War One. And of course, during World War One, 1914-18, Punjab was undivided. It was still Punjab, the original Punjab. And it was one of the primary recruiting grounds for the British Indian Army. 500,000 Punjabis and Indians went to the global front lines. And we know that in 2 world wars, 80,000 Sikhs lost their lives, sacrificed their lives in 2 world wars. So the numbers are just astronomical. And of course, the vast majority of Indian soldiers, Commonwealth soldiers sent to the trenches and to World War One came from Punjab. Because, of course, Punjabis, the Sikhs, are one of the greatest martial races on the planet, have always been and always will be. So, of course, it's not surprising that they form the vanguard, essentially the sharp end of the Commonwealth troops. Sadly, though, 10,000 of them who died were never actually officially recognised and were denied war grave status and then just fell away from history. Were not remembered. Their names are forgotten. Anyway, fortunately, the recovery of the identities has been after a huge 5-year effort internationally, known as the Punjab Registers Project, and it's a collaboration between the Commonwealth War Graves Commission, which is a wonderful organisation, and the UK Punjab Heritage Association, and one of our universities, the University of Greenwich. And they meticulously digitise, cross-reference all sorts of documentation, including a 26,000-page collection of handwritten village registers that have been preserved for a century inside the Lahore Museum. It's a massive project. You've got to take your hand off to these guys for this brilliant, wonderful effort that they've done. And it was led by all sorts of military historians and covered a deliberate century-old policy decision that caused this mess. The majority of those missing, the reason they got dropped off is because they didn't die directly on the battlefields. They actually were injured or suffered horrendous illnesses. Or, of course, they had the Spanish flu of 1918, which killed millions of people worldwide. So they were victims who died elsewhere. They might have been injured on the front line with fatal injuries, but they then were, I was going to say airlifted, they were medevaced to other areas where they died. But of course then their names were never registered as the dead under the official records. And secondly, there was a bureaucratic ruling that was done by the British Indian government at the time that decreed that deaths in those specific zones, in those outside the actual theatres of war, were then not eligible for war grave status. So, of course, their names were then never transmitted to the Commission officially through that bureaucratic chain, and thus, their names were never remembered. And here's some official statistics. It just brings tears to the eyes what happened in World War One. I mean, you can never overestimate just the horrors of World War One. And for these poor soldiers who gave their lives never to be recognised officially, again, it's a crime in itself. So, anyway, I'm going to move on now because I've only got a minute left to cover one final story, and I did want to cover this story because I quite like this story. It's an important one. Jaipal Singh Dhaliwal, well done. He's a lawyer from Surrey in British Columbia. And thanks to James, all of you guys who are asking, where's James? James is still out there, bless him. Hi, James, if you're watching, I hope you are. Yes, James actually sent me this as well, and I did actually pick this up myself. It's just been quietly circulating around I wouldn't quite say the mainstream media, but certainly local media. This lawyer from Surrey in British Columbia actually made history by becoming the first Sikh Canadian to summit Mount Everest, of course, the highest mountain in the world. May the 20th. Had a huge effort, of course. That's never a straightforward effort, is it? 8,848 metre peak. Is that right? I'm not sure that's right. Anyway, whatever. It is, of course, the highest peak on Earth, and he managed to get up there, and apparently he paused to take a photograph with a plaque of Guru Nanak Dev Ji's universal message of Chadi Kala, my favourite phrase, Nanak Nam Chadi Kala, Tere Bani Sabat Dabala. And wishing prosperity and blessings for all of humanity. Again, only a Sikh could do that. Well done. So it was not a straightforward expedition. It was quite a tough challenge, apparently, I think, on his descent. And sadly, I know as a former low-level mountaineer myself, I've summited Mont Blanc and a few others in the Alps, but I've never obviously reached such great heights as this. So I know a little bit of mountaineering. The descent is always a challenging one, because once you summit, then, of course, you've done it. And it's on the descent that is actually the most dangerous part, because then suddenly you start closing down, your body starts thinking, I've made it, I can relax now. But of course that makes it then the most dangerous part of your journey. And I don't know if it's correct to say most fatalities, but certainly a large part of fatalities on Everest, and indeed many of the big peaks of the world, the fatalities have occurred on the descent after the summit, because you celebrate, you reach the summit, hooray, and then you relax, and then on the way down, you don't have that adrenaline driving you that keeps you going. So anyway, but he did have a bit of a scare on the way down, apparently. And but he did apparently draw from his inner strength, and he performed Ardas, apparently, repeating the words of Guru Gobind Singh Ji, Nischay ka apni jeet karon. So apologies to you guys for my butchering the Punjabi language, but apparently that means with determination I shall achieve victory. Well done. You certainly did, Ajay Pal. Achieved a massive victory there. Massive well done from all of us. It's a wonderful achievement, huge achievement. So hats off to Ajay Pal. Right, let's move on as the clock counts down. Let's go on to our comments column. Thank you to you guys. Loads of comments. Oh, I've just remembered. With tribute to Hardal Singh. There you go. I remember to remove the logo, even though I haven't got my reminder there. Rajbir Sandhu sent a whole sequence of very interesting comments. Thank you, Rajbir, for your comments, actually. And I did actually, each one of them was interesting. It was a discussion point in itself. And I thought, which one? I thought, oh, you know what? I'll just put them all down there. We'll have a quick run through them all, because actually were very good talking points. First of all, of course, this refers to that discussion, that interview of that lady who talked about the geopolitics of that whole region between China, Pakistan and India, blaming China apparently for funding the Khalistan cause. It was nonsense, of course. But anyway, but she did refer to this funnel, this geographical funnel coming down from Xinjiang province, I think it's called, in China, that leads down into Ladakh. And Rajbir, you talk about that actually... in amongst all these discussions, of course, there's huge geopolitical dynamics going on there. There's a lot of pushing and pulling from all sources in this region, which is why it's so volatile. But as you rightly point out, Pakistan have got their eyes on Kashmir, but of course so is India, and of course they are constantly bashing into it. And as you rightly say, it was Mr. Sawhney, the Uber defence analyst, said it's not whether if, but when Pakistan will liberate Indian Kashmir from India, India administered Kashmir, etc., etc. In other words, ultimately, this is why they keep battling, because who is ultimately ever going to control Kashmir? This is why J&K, frankly, needs to go independent, because it's never, ever going to be resolved between India and Pakistan. No one side is going to take total control of J&K unless there is an absolute all-out war in which one side wins. And I, touch wood, predict it will never get to that, because the world will step in to stop it, because they are both nuclear-powered nations. And ultimately, if one side is facing potentially an existential threat, it will go nuclear. That is the big fear. So ultimately, the world will always keep the two apart and say, no, you can shout and roar at each other, you can lob a few missiles at each other, but if it starts escalating, we, the world, will step in, because you guys need to act like grown-ups, because you are armed with nuclear weapons, and we do not want you chucking those at each other. So, yeah, volatile region, absolutely, Rajbir. But then, of course, you do talk about China. Of course, China have been very subtly encroaching into this area, as indeed they have on the other side in East India, up in Arunachal Pradesh, where they've been encroaching into the village. Of course, they've been doing the same in Ladakh, as you rightly say here. Amit Shah rubbished Article 370, of course, throwing out the special reserve status for J&K. And in a speech, he said that India is going to take control of Aksal Chin, this disputed territory, which is obviously claimed by both India and China. But, as you rightly say, and I pointed out myself, India keeps losing territory to China, 4,000 square kilometres, according to your post here, as claimed by Subramanian Swamy. No wonder you've been seeing Chinese in that disputed territory, because they are taking advantage of the situation. And for some reason, and many critics have pointed this out, Modi just turns a blind eye to it. He talks a great game, but ultimately China, being China, very clever, very shrewd operators, they're just encroaching and just very subtly, but very surely, just taking more and more bites out of Indian territory, because Modi just doesn't seem to even notice. Mad. And then, yes, during the interview, he said, "Watch his eyes." Yes, because the whole agenda of the interview was very clearly it was another hit piece on the Khalistan movement. It was set up to have a go at the Khalistan movement. But as you rightly said, where did his script come from? Well, we certainly know what his agenda was. It was essentially, metaphorically even, written by RAW or NIA or whatever. So yeah, it's just another Indian state outlet just to have a bash at the Khalistan movement. They are terrified, because the Khalistan movement is winning this war. And then, oh yes, you referred to the discussion about the sniper. I did actually point this out. Those photos that China allegedly posted up, the People's Liberation Army, the PLA, posted up this propaganda piece showing a Chinese sniper aiming, apparently, at some targets that were Sikhs. Now, as you rightly point out, it was obviously fake. It was obviously staged. And I did actually say, look, if it was a real sniper sniping, you wouldn't be able to see him. He would be hidden in undergrowth. He would be camouflaged. But he's lying out there, out in the open. So clearly he's on a range, or it's just a completely staged photo. But likewise, the target, that Sikh, actually is not. It's not a real Sikh. It's a cardboard cutout. You need to look closely. It's not a real Sikh. It's a cardboard cutout. And when I was doing my military operations, whatever, when I was on the ranges, we used to have cardboard cutouts of Russians. Sorry, Russia, but that was just, what happens. We used to have cardboard cutouts of Russian soldiers. It's a standard. Anybody who's served in the British military will recognise it instantly. It's a standard Russian soldier charging at you like this. That was the standard cardboard cutout that every British soldier, I don't know if it's still the case now, but certainly when I did my military service, every person who's ever shot on a British range will recognise that target instantly. So it's clear that the whole thing was set up. It was a cardboard cutout. That whether they regularly use Sikhs as cardboard targets, I don't know. Or it could have been some joker on the internet just putting it together. It could have been a bit of AI. Produce me a cardboard cutout of a Sikh soldier, and then cut and paste. There you go. So, but your description is right. There are too many Pink Panther Inspector Clouseaus. For those of you who don't know the reference, there can't be many who don't. Inspector Clouseau is a creation from the Pink Panther film series, and is a very amateurish, clumsy French detective played by Peter Sellers, a genius. If you haven't seen those films, do watch them. They're from the 1960s, but they are fabulous watches. But yeah, Inspector Clouseau, it implies basically it's just a bunch of amateurs. I wouldn't call the Chinese army a bunch of amateurs. They're quite a scary force now and getting better every year. So never ever underestimate the Chinese army. But ultimately, this propaganda piece in itself was actually a bit clumsy, which implies to me it didn't come from official Chinese sources. It was some joker out there probably who sent it out there. So anyway, thank you, Rajbir, for your contributions. They were very interesting. Yes. Stay safe. Responded to this. Stay safe if you're watching, and I know you do like to watch regularly. I'm going to respond to your comments about my first live show tomorrow. So watch tomorrow's show about that, because I had a chuckle. Anyway, but this made me chuckle because, of course, when I did my podcast with Dr. Graywell last week, just literally after Dr. Graywell started speaking, we lost the connection. And I sat there for a few seconds saying, oh, please don't. And I did actually make a comment. I said something like, oh, no, please, or whatever. Fortunately, I didn't actually use any bad language, because the trouble is, if it goes all wrong, I then have to stop it. It's pre-recorded, so I have to stop it. And it means I then got to spend an hour after the podcast editing it all together, etc. If nothing goes wrong, I can then just upload it. So when it does go wrong, I just sit there and think, oh, no, please don't, because it means another hour of work to sort of get it uploaded. So that's why you heard me going, oh, please, don't don't mess up. As I say, there was no bad language, fortunately. So anyway, and likewise, I say, do watch tomorrow's show. I was practicing going live. And it wasn't supposed to be out there in public, but it turns out it did go out in public accidentally because I you know me, I'm not very good with technical things. And particularly you try and go live on YouTube. It's not just a technical challenge; it's an intellectual challenge. You need to be an absolute genius to work it out, especially if you've no idea what you're doing, like myself. So I did actually broadcast live to the world accidentally for only probably about 30 seconds, but I did make a few comments, which of course Stay Safe picked up on. Anyway, I'll talk about that tomorrow. But anyway, on this one, so yes, everybody's, oh yeah, Chardy colour. It was a wonderful moment of Chardy colour is exactly what it was. And TC, thank you. Well restrained. Indeed, it was extraordinarily well restrained, I have to say. So thank you for your appreciation of that. Talk about Stay Safe. Yes, this is about education. And the podcast I did with Dr. Grail is a very interesting one. I do watch it. Dr. Grail talked about the new Khalsa College that's been established in the United States. And it has a fabulous heritage, history, back in Punjab, obviously. And, of course, pre-partition. It was established pre-partition. It then lost its geographical location after partition. It suddenly found itself on the Pakistan side of the border. So then had to relocate back to Chandigarh and et cetera, et cetera. And he'd watched the podcast for the history. But of course, education is essential. Passing the message of Sikhi down to the next generations. It is a fundamental part of ensuring the continuity of the Sikh faith. So the Khalsa College was set up to ensure that there is a centre of excellence, a centre of learning where people can go, and as you rightly point out, Stay Safe, loads of courses, and as Dr. Grail said in his podcast, it has been designed deliberately. This is no money-making exercise. This is not a commercial enterprise. It is set up with one simple goal in mind, that is to educate as many people about the Sikh faith as possible. If you cannot afford a course, then tell them, and they will literally make it affordable for you. They will probably charge 1 cent, But ultimately, most of those courses are $30. They've designed it not $3,000 like many courses are. It's $30 to make it accessible. In other words, you have no excuse but to go on a course. If you want to learn more about Sikhi, the Sikh faith, about leadership skills, there's a whole raft of fascinating modules to learn, to be educated on. So do go onto the website, have a look, and thank you, Stay Safe, for supporting it. And your second comment, which actually I copied up here, this is actually an interesting comment because it is all about the degradation of education, particularly in Punjab, where there's been, I was going to say it is a deliberate agenda in India and of course in Punjab to degrade education. Because if you educate a populace, they become a threat to an authoritarian regime. So it is actually in the interests of the Brahmanical elite of India to make sure that the average Indian, and particularly the Sikh community, is not educated as well as maybe they should be. And so, as you rightly point out, Stay Safe, there is an agenda that's been going on for decades to deliberately degrade the syllabus, the teaching, introducing this sort of Marxist philosophy, Hindification. We know this is true. This is no conspiracy, because how often have I had to talk about the Hindification of the syllabus, the language spoken in schools? They are deliberately kicking out the Punjabi speaking teachers and replacing them with Hindi only speaking teachers who tell the children, don't speak to me in Punjabi, speak to me in Hindi. So yeah, it is. It's all part of this this overall agenda. Interestingly, and it's particularly interesting because we've got the same here in the UK, believe it or not. It's not Hindification, but there is a Marxist agenda, an extreme left-wing progressive politics agenda that is now being imposed on our school syllabuses. So our children, we've got a whole generation of children, which is actually why we've got so many social problems now. We don't have time to talk about it. But ultimately, this is the product of exactly this same process, that our children, our young generation who are now the young adults, and sadly, the future leaders have been indoctrinated with this Marxist ideology, which is not just dangerous, it doesn't work. It breaks apart societies. It is an ideology of hatred, of division, of authoritarianism. Essentially, it's what the Soviet Union used to be. It's what Stalin essentially tried to impose, and others along those sorts of lines. It's just not good for a modern democratic society. So anyway, thank you, Stay Safe, for that. Critics Corner. We're running out of time. Got to be quick now. Critics Corner. Yes, thank you, Glashut. You had a bit of a rant here. It's the same old, isn't it? But it was a pretty poorly argued rant. And the reason that actually you don't get any reasoned response is because of your second rant that you had a go at Jaskirat Singh. And Jaskirat, bless him, thank you Jaskirat, for a very nice comment. You put Vaiguruji, Chadikala, Khalistan Zindabad. And then in comes Glashuti or whatever with a really, really offensive comment. And I've copied it here, but it won't appear in public. This is probably the only comment in the last 6 months that I have not allowed through, that I have actually deleted. As you know, I never ever delete comments. However, counter-argument, well, I won't quite say however rude, but certainly however critical they are, I will always let critical comments through because I respect your right to criticise me, to have a different point of view. That is what happens in freedom of speech in a democratic world. But when you come on and you make really, really offensive comments that actually make no argument, they're just offensive for the sake of being offensive, you're like a 12-year-old child. Those are the sorts of comments that we make when we're little boys at school, you know? So please, by all means, come on and make comments, but argue. If you think that we are a bunch of Khalistani terrorists, explain why you believe that. Show us some evidence, argue it. Don't just come on and make 12-year-old childish comments. It just is pointless. And it just gives us a bit of a chuckle, frankly. Katie FPV. Yeah, this is a nice metaphor. Modi is a honeybee carrying out his poison stings around the world. Essentially, just trying to spread his terror all around the world. He's trying to program the Western world with its Hindutva ideology to take over Western culture. Well, I don't think he's ever going to achieve that. As powerful as Hindutva are, they've achieved it in India. But over in the West, they are trying, obviously. But no, it ain't going to happen. It's too extremist. And why would the West want Hindutva ideology? The West aren't Hindus. There's no way your average white person in America, for example, is ever going to convert to Hinduism. You get the odd one. But most of them, frankly, it ain't going to happen. So don't worry. Don't stress. Chadi Kala. Sukhwinder Grewal. Vaiguruji. And the final honour of the show goes to Jaskirat Singh. Deservedly so, who faced that really offensive comment. So, as a result, you get the pride of place in today's show. Vaiguruji, Chadi Kala, Khalistan Zindabad. That is indeed what it's all about. Thank you so much for watching, you guys. I think we managed the whole show. I don't know if anybody popped in live. It doesn't matter. But all being well, I will be back at maybe 5 o'clock tomorrow again. But do let me know what time in your time zone would work for you, because I'm still trying to work out what time zone's best. Don't forget I'm in UK time, so I can't broadcast at like 4 a.m. UK time. It's just not going to happen. I need my sleep. But any time during, UK 6 a.m. through to, 7 p.m, whatever. If there's a time that works for you in your time zone, let me know. Just give me some feedback. So because I can maybe do it 6 a.m, which is like 10 p.m. West Coast America, which is also daytime. It's early afternoon in India. So it's feasible. Anyway, let me know your thoughts. But in the meantime, thank you for your comments. Obviously, the views of yesterday's video were low because, well, this is all new. This live stuff is new. But just give me some feedback. Let me know your thoughts. Is it working? Do you like it live? Do you prefer the old style where I think I usually launched it, released it, uploaded it about 9 a.m, 10 a.m. UK time? They obviously got more views. Who knows? But anyway, it's up to you guys. But do let me know your thoughts. Let me know your comments. Thank you for you guys who have commented. Message me. Message at satlujtv.com. I'd read all your emails. Thank you guys who have emailed me. Much appreciated. But that is it for another day. We have survived another day going live. Have a great night, all you guys. And God willing, I will catch you guys tomorrow.